Alrighty, guys, let's talk Squid Game Season 2. And if you can't tell by the beginning of the segment, my voice is a little bit gone. I've lost it recently. You'll notice in some segments my voice sounds a little bit better than others. And I just, I've done some podcasts and done some segments talking about how I record a little bit out of order sometimes, so you'll have to forgive me for that. Hopefully you'll be able to bear with me here as we talk about Squid Game Season 2. But guys, this is going to be a non-spoiler and spoiler review for Squid Game Season 2. So, if you haven't seen Squid Game Season 2, I will be talking about the series, or the season rather, in non-spoilery detail, so no worries there. However, I did want to preface this by saying I will be spoiling Season 1. So if you have not seen Season 1 at all, then this probably isn't the review for you. I'll try to be as general and as vague as possible, but really Season 2, there's not a whole lot you can say about it without really talking about what happens in Season 1. So the first part of this review, the non-spoiler review, will be non-spoilery for Season 2, but I will be talking about Season 1, and then we'll transition into a spoiler review for both seasons, but particularly in Season 2, if that makes sense. And let's get into it. So, Squid Game is a show that I saw. It came out, was it 2021? Christmas time? Or yeah, it was Christmas time 2021. That's crazy. Maybe 2022? I could be wrong. But it was a couple years ago. And I was a little bit late to it. It came out in December, but I don't think I was that late. I think I watched it that Christmas, maybe a few weeks late to it. And I was just floored by how much I enjoyed the show. And by enjoyed, I mean it took me on an emotional roller coaster of every single kind of feeling that you can feel. It had the tension, obviously, with the games, the novelty as well. It had great character work, great acting. It's not often that I'm able to watch international film and TV, and so this was just a great insight into just great South Korean actors and South Korean filmmakers, and just amazing work that they were able to do with the first season of Squid Game. It was tense, and yet it had a lot to say about society as well, about how desperate capitalism and money can make people, and the lengths they're willing to go to get out of it, and really just the what it takes to be to stand up against that, as our protagonist Gi-hoon is able to do so well. So or at least, as he struggles with that throughout the first season and is able to eventually triumph at the end, obviously at great cost. And so, as soon as the season ended, and this was a show, right? Because, again, I've said this before, there are many movies and shows where you finish the first installment and you go, oh, okay, finished story. And then they make a second one and you're like, or they announce a second one and you're like, I don't get it. I don't get how you're going to do it. Now, I've said this before, that doesn't necessarily mean the sequel is going to be bad. Case in point, recently, Toy Story 3 to Toy Story 4. Toy Story 3 was done. It ended the trilogy. They announced Toy Story 4, and I said, in what world? How are we going to be able to do this? And it turns out Toy Story 4, while, again, not, perfect and not my favorite Toy Story film, I think was awesome. I really love Toy Story 4. So it just goes to show that sometimes, you can close out the story, but then you can find ideas for sequels. It's just harder, I think. But Squid Game Season 1 was not like that, because Squid Game Season 1 didn't end with a cliffhanger per se. It just ended with a very natural continuation into what the next part of the story could be. Because obviously, at the end of the games, Gi-hoon wins, and he has lost everyone in the game, and so he realizes the cost. We find out who the originator, the creator of the games was. It was the old man who was in the games with him the whole time. And then, there's a lot of closure there, right? There's a lot of closure for his character and whatnot, but then there's a very natural continuation of, okay, now he really wants to get back at the people who created the games. And thus we find ourselves in Season 2. I was very excited when they announced Season 2, because I thought you got to make a Season 2 for Squid Game. I was very, very excited for that. Then we didn't really hear about it for quite a while, until maybe earlier in 2024, we started to hear more about it, and soon enough we got trailers and promo, and before we knew it, Squid Game Season 2 coming out December 26, 2024. All 7 episodes of it, which pretty short compared to Season 1, which was, I think, 9 episodes. And so, full disclosure, and maybe this is something you don't want to hear, so skip ahead 15 seconds. It's not a spoiler for the season at all. It's just something about the next season, actually, that I didn't know going into Season 2, and maybe you don't want to know either. So skip ahead 15 seconds if you don't want to know. Season 3 is coming out very, very soon. It's coming out in maybe 6 months to a year. So I didn't know that going into Season 2, and I just thought, okay, Season 2, let's go. And so I watched Season 2. Again, it's not, we'll talk more about that maybe in the spoiler discussion about what that might mean, but just something that I didn't know going into Season 2. So I watched Season 2. I watched it in about, I'd say, 2 or 3 chunks. And here's what I'll say about it. I really enjoyed it holistically. I think that the things they did well in Season 1, they carried over completely into Season 2. And it's not like, oh yeah, they took kind of a step back with these things. First of all, the games themselves. The games in season 2 are just as tense, just as well shot, just as well choreographed, just as well, staged, and the tension and the music and the characters of the players, and yes, the brutal deaths, which are still as brutal as ever, but raising the tension, adding stakes to it. The games themselves were just as good, I would say, as in season 1. The character work, I think, this is one thing where I'll say perhaps not quite as good as season 1, but really close. I think that Gi-hoon's character arc in season 2 is very interesting, and it's different. It's a little bit different than in season 1, because obviously it can't be the same as it was in season 1. Season 1, he went through an entire transformation of being one of those people who were on the streets or who was in such great debt, and then was brought into the games, and at the end he has all the money, but he realizes that it's blood money, right? And so Gi-hoon's character now in season 2 is out to just based on the continuation at the end of season 1, he's out for revenge. He's out to really take down these games and topple them, right? Because it's a very evil thing that's going on. So his character, I think, goes through a lot of growth. I would say less growth in this season, but has a very clear motive and a very clear understanding of where he is, and I think that's a different way of looking at that character. Then there are many other characters that both from season 1, the ending of season 1, that we get to see in greater detail and greater light, and also a lot of new characters, right? Because this is a whole new set of games, and again, this is all in the trailers for season 2, and so hopefully it's not a big spoiler. But yeah, there's a new set of games. You see in the trailers they play red light, green light again. And so there are a lot of new characters to get attached to it. What Squid Game does so well in both season 1 and season 2 is get you attached to new characters so quickly. And there's so many characters there, right? It's hard to keep track of them sometimes. That's why, again, numbering scheme is kind of helpful because there's just so many characters with such little time to really get attached to them. But you quickly begin to learn their names and begin to learn their backstories, and all of a sudden the numbers are not the way you're identifying them, and it's you're looking at characters again, not to we'll talk more about their specific names and their specific roles in the spoiler discussion, but it's such a integral part of the show is that being able to become attached to these characters, so that again not to spoil anything, but some of them may not make it out and some of them may, and so that's the tension, right? That's the tension of the show. I think that was really, really well done. Now, one thing I was thinking about going into season 2, and this is, again, all based on the trailer, so no spoilers here. But I was thinking about the fact that, okay, so at the end of season 1, Gi-hoon is out of the games. He's won the games, and now he wants to topple these games, and how is he going to do that? And I thought, okay, that's a great idea for season 2. Let's take this now, and let's say, okay, now it's about Gi-hoon trying to take down the Squid Games, right? And then I watched the first trailer for season 2, and he was right back in the games. I mean, there were lines in the trailer where he goes, "I've already been here." He's yelling at everyone in the dorms, and I was like, wait a second, that doesn't feel right. Why in the world is he back in the games? And that's a question that a lot of characters ask throughout the season. And I will say, I was very skeptical because I was like, okay, Netflix, is this just sort of a way to cash grab and capitalize on the fact that, well, the first season worked so well, so why don't we just do this, basically the same thing as the first season, and manufacture a way to get him back in the games? And I will say this, because I was very worried that this was just an excuse to get him back in the games because, oh, you remember the first season, right, where Gi-hoon was in the games, and you really liked the first season, so let's do it again. I'll say, the reason that Gi-hoon is back in the games is much more narratively satisfying than I thought it had any business being entering the season, which I thought was really good. There is a very clear reason why Gi-hoon wants to get back into the games, and it's honestly quite simple, and I think that it works to its benefit, the show's benefit. However, once he is in the games, then the show does start to diverge into the old not formulas, but the old patterns of the first Squid Game. And what I mean by that, again, not talking about specific details, but is that the beginning of season 2 is setting up a lot of very interesting plot points related to the end of season 1, which is, how is Gi-hoon going to take down the Squid Games, right? And then at a certain point, he re-enters the Squid Game, as you would understand from the trailers, as you would see from the trailers. And at that point, the show kind of abandons a lot of the threads that it had set up earlier on in the season, and it just basically becomes another Squid Game. Now, these Squid Games are a little different, obviously, because Gi-hoon knows what's going on, and that's a big plot point in this show about the fact that he knows and the fact that he is still trying to take the games down, but in what way, in what capacity. And there are a lot of twists and turns as there were with season 1. So it's not exactly the same, because in the first season he was just trying to survive, right? In this season it's like, okay, there's a little bit more going on here. But I will say there is a very clear turning point in this season where it does become a lot more like season 1. And so I just think I think my worries going into the season of, oh, is it just going to be a carbon copy of season 1? I think were both assuaged and brought up, because I think that, yes, there's a very good reason for Gi-hoon to be back in the games, but then there's also, then it just kind of becomes the games again, which I think, again, like I said at the beginning, the games are very well shot, it's very tense, and the tension is what really makes this show, and so I think it's really well done. Now, a lot of people, again, no spoilers here, but this is just talking about the perception of the finale. A lot of people, the one thing I did know going into season 2 was that a lot of people were pretty disappointed with the finale. And I was like, okay, is it because they resolve it in a very unsatisfying way and whatnot? And I watched the finale, and I will say I understand exactly where people are coming from, and I totally get it. I think the finale has problems, and I think that for what it is, it works pretty well, but I completely understand why people are dissatisfied. I would expect the vast majority of people who watch the finale to be a little bit disappointed at the very least. I was a little disappointed, but there are a lot of complicating factors around that we'll talk about in just a second. So overall, Squid Game Season 2, non-spoiler review before we get into spoilers. I liked it. I thought that all the best parts of Season 1 were there again. Is this as good as Season 1? No, not even particularly close, because I think Season 1 did just so much, right? Like, there were some, what in Season 1, when the old man supposedly died, I felt that. I was brought to tears by that, because that was just such an emotional part. And the acting, by the way, just to say before we end the non-spoiler section, is that Lee Jung-jae is amazing. Again, he's just so good. The rest of the cast is also amazing in this season. The acting is phenomenal. So, but in Season 1, right, Lee Jung-jae's pain and hurt and sadness from the old man's death, and then also him losing his best friend at the end of that season, and all the other things when he realizes his mom was dead at the end of there were just so many more emotional moments in Season 1 that make me feel the depths of the pains of these characters, and I think it ultimately comes to a very satisfying conclusion at the end, where you're like, yeah, no, he won the games, and he went through this journey, but he understands the cost of it. Season 2, it's Squid Game, so people are gonna die, and every time it happened, I was like, oh yeah, no, I mean, I don't really feel emotionally, I'm just sad about it, But yeah, I don't think it reached the same emotional depths that Season 1 did. Maybe it wasn't supposed to. Maybe it wasn't, aiming for that. It was still just as brutal, still just as tense as Season 1. But I think that, and the story had its problems, but I think there are a lot of, again, complicating factors around that. So I think that Season 2 didn't quite reach the heights of Season 1. And I think that's okay, because I still think Season 2 is quite good. I really enjoyed it. Really, really enjoyed Season 2. But I think more than ever, I think Season 3 has the opportunity to be the best season of them all. And we'll go into that in just a second. So that is my non-spoiler review of Squid Game Season 2. And now if you have not seen Season 2, then I would recommend clicking off and just saving this for later and coming back once you have, because we are about to dive into spoilers. And there are a lot of spoilers to talk about here. So here we go. Okay, so let's talk about the ending, because the ending is what most people want to talk about. Because, yes, this is not really a complete season of Squid Game. And that's not something I knew going into the season, actually. I had no idea that Season 3 was going to be coming out in less than a year. Allegedly, it's coming out in less than a year. And because of that, I watched the finale, and at some point, about halfway through the finale, I was like, there's no way this is going to be complete. And then I went online and looked up Squid Game Season 3 and realized, okay, it's coming out in less than a year. And I kind of figured we're doing the cliffhanger. And sure enough, we did the cliffhanger. Now, this has been my eternal frustration with these kinds of things. And I think with TV and movies, it's a little bit different. But I'll just give a couple movie examples, and then I'll give a TV example of what happened here. Or some things that I think are very similar. So, in the movies, right? Across the Spider-Verse, which I know a lot of you guys think is one of the best Spider-Man movies, and I love that for you guys. I think that's awesome. I personally don't. I think it's really, really, really good. But I don't think it's one of the best Spider-Man movies ever made. That being said, one of my eternal frustrations with Across the Spider-Verse is that I feel like it ended very open-ended. And it was very much an invitation to be like, okay, we'll see you in, well, I was supposed to be see you in a year for Beyond the Spider-Verse, is turning into see you in 6 or 7 years for Beyond the Spider-Verse, because there was no intention to resolve the main storyline. Okay, that is what it is. Now, other part ones, like I think Wicked Part 1, for example, ends very satisfyingly. It resolves most of the major threads while leaving the door open for what could be a Part 2. I think Infinity War is kind of a Part 1. I think it does very much the same thing. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 as well. Now, in TV, the one show that I was thinking about as Season 2 of Squid Game ended, was Loki. Because Loki Season 1 ended, and I was like, that was so utterly disappointing. And I know a lot of people love the finale of Loki, and that's totally good. I was so frustrated by the end of Loki, not just because of Kang and I didn't like Jonathan Majors' performance, which is true, but that's not why. But just because I was like, you're kidding. You didn't resolve anything, really. And then we get season 2, I think 2 years later, we get season 2. And what do we get? The first shot of the first episode of season 2 picks up seconds, literal seconds after the end of season 1. And it became very clear to me that Loki season 1 and Loki season 2 were just a big 12 episode story. I think Squid Game season 2 and season 3 are doing pretty much the same thing. Is that frustrating? Yeah, it's a bit frustrating. And I think that it's hard then to gauge season 2 as a whole season, because I think season 3 needs to answer, season 3 needs to be that part 2 of season 2, because nothing was resolved. I was listening to Dan Murrell's review of Squid Game, and I completely agree. You have the character. So first of all, Gi-hoon doesn't know that In-ho is the front man. And In-ho being player 1 is the front man. That's huge. We don't have character resolutions for all the characters who are still contestants who are still in the game, like the mom and his son, the pregnant player. We don't have a resolution for the soldier 11 as well. She's been in the game, shooting people, and we don't have a resolution for her as well. I think Noel is her name. And so we don't have a resolution for her as well. And then we also don't have a resolution at all for the frontman's brother, Minho's brother, Junho, because he's out there on a boat searching for the island. And then the captain, who I knew the second he appeared on screen, I knew he was a traitor. I knew he was in league with the Squid Games. And he betrayed, he revealed his true colors to a couple of the soldiers. So, we don't know what's going on there. So nothing has been resolved. And again, it's fine in a sense of like, okay, this is just part 1, and so part 2 will probably, Squid Game season 3 will probably resolve a bunch of these things, but it's just eternally frustrating to kind of have these things. I don't understand why we couldn't have just had this all be in one season, honestly. Was it just, we didn't want to wait that long, or is season 3 going to be, because look, if season 3 is going to be a completely different storyline, and it's going to, season 3 has its own beginning, middle, and end, which is fine, it's good, but then it's going to make season 2 feel even less satisfying, because it's just going to leave season 2 dangling. So I'd almost prefer if season 3 was just outright the second half of one story, which I think the creator said it was going to be. So I guess there's that. In terms of, I thought it was a really neat idea at first, but then throughout the games, to have the frontman, be a part of the games. It strikes me though, because we've done this twice now, I realize, with, the creator of the game, the old man, being a part of the games in season 1, and now In-ho being a part of the games in season 2, that, they're being very cavalier with their lives, because, sure that the guards, I'm sure, know that they're in the games as these players, but, there's a lot of randomness that goes into the deaths of these characters, and I don't know, it seems just kind of crazy that they'd risk their lives for this kind of thing, but maybe that's the point, I don't know. So, yeah, there's that. And yeah, in terms of the season as a whole, I really liked the setup at the beginning. The first couple episodes, I thought, especially the recruiter episode at the beginning, I thought was so strong. And, I think going through that beginning, I was like, okay, there's a justification for why Gi-hoon gets back on the island, because they put a tracker in him as the last resort when he's chasing the front man, and now they're going to be able to track him, but that goes wrong. And I'm like, okay, really good idea, really makes sense. But then you get onto the island, and then the tracker's gone, and they realized it, and so then it's like, okay, he's back in the games. But then once, at that point, we kind of ditched the Junho storyline with the boat and searching for the island. That just goes away pretty much completely. At a certain point, it just becomes another Squid Game, and it just becomes another, Gi-hoon trying to survive. And that's like, okay, I get it, really fun, really tense. The 5-minute 5-course obstacle course, kind of 5-minute obstacle course kind of thing was crazy, and it was tense, and it was amazing. But I think it just kind of became Squid Game again. And I for better or for worse, because I think the games themselves are orchestrated so well, but I kind of wish that we had been really digging into those A and B storylines of, okay, we got to take these games down, instead of now we're just trying to survive the games, which I think is fun. There were some other really interesting auxiliary characters. I grew very fond of the mom and her son. I think that they were very compelling characters, and I'm very afraid they're going to die in season 3, because I think that's just how it goes with these kinds of shows. The Thanos character, man, was he annoying, and was he really crazy, and yeah, there was a similar character I think I remember in season 1 who was kind of the bully, or the quote-unquote jock of the group, and this Thanos character fills in that void. I think there are some very compelling characters. I think the A lot of the side characters are very compelling, and I just think that their arcs are very incomplete, and I don't know where they're gonna go from here. So I think at the end of the day, Squid Game season 2 had all the right things in it. It just didn't have a complete story, and for what it's worth, I think that it's fine to have this be part 1 of a bigger story. I just kind of wish it wasn't. I just kind of wish it wasn't. So, guys, those were my thoughts on Squid Game Season 2. Have you seen it? And if you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments down below. And are you excited for Season 3? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below.